uh, loving search for the lost servant by his divine grace, Bhaktivedanta, excuse me, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami. I was just noticing, you can see the cover there. We put Swami B.R. Sridhar, and no one objected to that. Later on, Pranashish and I tried to publish my version of the Premadama Stotram, and I think we put Srila B.R. Sridhar. But, this was good enough for Govinda Maharaj and Sridhar Maharaj back in 1986 or whenever we published this. So I suppose with the passing of time, 1987, so this is 40 years ago, more or less. With the passing of time, I suppose we can add more and more honorifics, but it's not always so necessary. Srila Sri Ramakrishna himself did not favor so much pomp and circumstance. Uh, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, he allowed it because I think he felt that we Western devotees would uh, profit from that if more respect were shown. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj was not a man who uh, really appreciated uh, thrones of gold and golden cars and all the pomp and circumstance of a 20th century guru. He was very happy relaxing on this platform he had on the veranda overlooking the Ganges when the sun went down. And one day the devotees thought to honor him by buying him a very nice chair, a very nice upholstered chair. And the stairs up to the veranda are quite narrow. It was really difficult to move that up the stairs. It took like 5 men grunting and sweating to navigate the angles on the stairs with that upholstered chair. And when they set it up, Srila Sridhar Maharaj came out and looked at it, and he was just like, I'm not sitting in that. He had this beautiful old chair. You've seen it in photos where it had on the arms of the chair, there were wooden extensions that reached out, and he could put his legs up on there, and it was good for a massage. It was a very beautiful chair. And that's where he used to like to sit. And when they tried to get him to sit in the new chair, he said, I like the old and familiar things. And like he really rejected that chair for a long time. But after a while, they convinced him, and he began sitting in it and giving his talks and lectures there. And bit by bit, that chair also became old and familiar. And he liked it, used to sit there as well. But I give that as an example of the idea that he wasn't someone who uh, would have to have a new Mercedes Benz to drive around in. I never saw him leave the temple. In fact, he he hadn't left the temple in many, many years. If anyone knows of any event like that. I saw it recently on YouTube or internet or one of those, Facebook, where when Bhaktivedanta Swami had returned from the West with a couple of disciples, he was looking to stay somewhere in Navadvip. And some of his godbrothers, as godbrothers do, they were critical, not so interested in offering him hospitality. And they said, well, he's been to Malecha Desh, and why should we really offer him anything? And Srila Sridhar Maharaj sent Govinda Maharaj and others to the Navadvip, I think it was the Navadvip Sanskrit Society, to tell them, you organize a big meeting and welcome Bhaktivedanta Swami, and you tell them Sridhar Maharaj will come. And when they heard that, they thought, oh, Sridhar Maharaj is coming. Well, in that case, we should, organize a big reception. And Govinda Maharaj asked him, are you really going to go to that? I said, no, of course not. I can't make it down the stairs. But when they hear that I'm coming, they'll offer him a nice reception. And so it came to pass that when he arrived in Navadvip, all the big swamis were there waiting for him. And he had a very successful return, and later stayed there with Achyutananda and some of his other men. Achyutananda later spent a long time at the Chaitanya Saraswat Math in Navadvip. But I just mentioned all this I was thinking this morning, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he was not uh, given to pomp and circumstance. And then I was also thinking, so many of my God, I'm a disciple of Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. I got Harinam initiation from him, but I never was able to take second initiation from him because, of course, he passed away. And so all the God brothers had this thing where you're not really in the club, you know, and I felt a bit excluded by that. And I noticed that so many disciples of Srila Prabhupada, even today, they're very expert in imitating um, Prabhupada's walk, his talk, how walking with a cane, even if they don't really have a problem with their leg, just affecting that sort of Swami style walk, speaking like Srila Prabhupada, you know. And in a sense, all of that was really very easy to imitate. Uh, and then how he spoke and what he spoke about. Oftentimes, Srila Prabhupada would make things simple for the Western devotees. So they would ask him, oh, how many yojanas is it to planet X? And he would say, just chant Hare. You must simply chant holy name. Simply chant Hare Krishna and be happy. This is our plan. This is our program. And so my godbrothers, of course, they would always talk like that. They became expert in imitating Srila Prabhupada's walk, his talk, how he described Krishna consciousness, how he criticized the chapati. You know, Bhaktivedanta Swami was very expert as a cook. Um, he understood spicing very, very well, and all those things, all the nuances of Vedic and Hindu cooking. He was expert in that. And so the devotees would often tell stories like, oh, they would prepare Srila Prabhupada's lunch, prasadam, and they would bring in his plate, and he would look at a chapati and say, what is this? And they would say, chapati, Srila Prabhupada. No. What is this? It's a chapati? No. Chapati means hot. Oh, take it back. And they would go back and forth 5 or 6 times, and then finally he would say, this is chapati. And so Srila Prabhupada's disciples, of course, we love all these stories, because they humanize a great man. But the problem becomes when we try to imitate the style and attitude of a great man, and then uh, you have devotees taking a plate of prasadam. I've seen this personally, you know, and then throwing it against the wall because, chapati means hot. But is this really the essence of Krishna consciousness? Is that what we take away after 50 years of studying Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita? Well, for some devotees, it is. My point being that Srila Prabhupada, he was not difficult to imitate. And by imitating his style, his mannerism, it was easy to impress other people. That's maybe why they did that. So I was trained by my god brothers, to a great extent. But when it comes to Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he's really far more difficult to imitate. See? For example, he didn't have any teeth. So you want to try to imitate that? Go ahead. Good luck. He didn't wear expensive silk cloth. He didn't, as far as food goes, I never saw him complain about any plate that was offered to him. He would eat in silence, and he would take prasadam as if he were honoring the prasadam, and at the same time reflecting on something, perhaps Vaikuntha, we didn't know. But he was not one to throw his plate of prasadam against the wall and tell people chapati means hot. I never saw him complain. And also, the prasadam they gave him would be very simple prasadam. Of course, he was old, and when you're older, spicy food is not good. If you look at Bhakti Pradeep Tirtha's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and I read that for another uh, talk that we were giving, Gita talks, somewhere in, I think, the 10th chapter, he describes what food you cannot offer to Krishna and what cannot be taken as prasadam. And he mentions, for example, spiced garbanzo beans, spicy chickpeas, which everybody loves, of course, But back in the day of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, uh, spicy food may have been looked down upon as something sensual, a sensual delight, you know. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj, his prasadam taking was not about becoming a gourmand or a foodie or an expert in delicious foods. It was something that he took, he honored, and then moved on to the next thing he did. So that would have been difficult, and it is difficult to imitate. Govinda Maharaj, of course, is another story. Govinda Maharaj loved uh, nice prasadam, as Meenakshi Sundaram will testify. She knows about that, you know. There's a famous story. I don't know why I'm telling these stories, but you know all these stories. The famous story is how Govinda Maharaj, he used to love Muri. And one time, Bhaktivedanta Swami came upon him eating his Muri, and he said, but Govinda, this is simply cheating the stomach. As if to say, Maury, there's nothing there. It's just all air. But if you looked at Govinda Maharaj, he was robust. He was not skinny. So I don't know if Maury really qualifies as cheating the stomach because it seemed to do all right for him. But anyways, my point is, I saw that if I were to become a proper follower of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, in the same way that devotees were imitating Srila Prabhupada, of course, I wanted to imitate Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I found that, well, he's really erudite. So maybe if I become more erudite, I'll be more like him. I worshiped him. And that's why I wound up reading so many books. And of course, Rupa Goswami warns you, don't read too many books. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj himself will say, uh, it's not about Gyan. It's not about knowing so many things. We're interested in Jnana Shunya Bhakti. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj is cautioning you against reading too much. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur also, he says, in the end, I feel like a beast of burden with all these books breaking my back, all this so-called knowledge. What good is it? But somehow that was my position. I was told your service will be make sense of what Srila Sridhar Maharaj is saying because everyone thinks, oh, what it says is too high, it's too difficult, it's too complicated, no one can understand it. You know, Srila Prabhupada is simple. We get him. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj is, was during my lifetime, he was the living representative of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The other day I saw posted on the internet, somebody is saying something about avoid exploitation and renunciation. But this was coming from someone else. And one of my godbrothers pointed out, hey, that's Srila Sridhar Maharaj, isn't it? And the person who posted that wasn't really sure what to say. But it's like if you hear a certain, composition, you're like, hey, wait a minute, I know what that is. And in Gustav Mahler's Symphony number 2, I think it is, he has a minor key version of Are You Sleeping, Brother John? So you hear that and you go, wait a minute, I know where that comes from. I've heard that one before. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj's deep thought permeates anything that's worthwhile in the modern Krishna consciousness movement. And that is because he trained Srila Prabhupada. It's not an idle thing to say, oh, well, he was Srila Prabhupada's Shiksha Guru, and you have to, oh, well, then prove it. When, where, how? Well, they, shared a flat at Sitakanta Banerjee Lane in Calcutta. Yeah, so what? Well, Srila Prabhupada used to go upstairs and listen to Bhagavad Gita lectures. Yeah, I don't believe it. Fine. It's nice to have your skepticism about absolutely everything, except your dogma. But if you study what Bhaktivedanta Swami says, you'll see, wait a minute, there's Srila Sridhar Maharaj, just as in the Search for Sri Krishna. Srila Sridhar Maharaj tells us a story about Aurobindo Ghosh, who was a radical revolutionary in Bengal back in the day when they wanted independence from England. And there was a bomb throwing incident. And somehow uh, Aurobindo Ghosh, he was implicated. So he absconded. They were looking for him. And there was a court case where they arrested the editor of the Amrita Bazar Patrika, it was a Bengali newspaper, for publishing articles by Ghosh. And they were published under a different name, but the prosecutor read it out. And he then read another article. And by comparing the two, he demonstrated, he said, here is Mr. Ghosh. In other words, you may change the name and you may change, the details, but the essence of the thing remains the same. So you can look at the teachings of Bhaktivedanta Swami, and when they're really good and really to the point, you'll see, oh, wait a minute, this is deep. This is coming from Sridhar Maharaj. And you know, that sounds like a radical thing to say, and perhaps it is, and that's why I'm living alone in Mexico. As Pranashish pointed out, I don't know, he said I'm the leader of the misfits or something like that, the leader of the outcasts and the misfits. So, the God brothers who are expert in imitation, they may say, what? How can you listen to Srila Sridhar Maharaj? You don't know, you know, the real thing is Bhaktivedanta Swami. But if you look around, what's left of the Krishna consciousness movement in terms of the followers and disciples of the disciples and followers of the disciples, and you see, well, okay, they're promoting the Ganesh festival and they're promoting Holi and sprinkling colored water on people and wearing funny hats. But, where is Gauranga Mahaprabhu? You know, Jnanilo Premadana. What happened to Rupa Goswami? Where's Swarup Damodar? Where's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in all this? And when you find that, you'll see, aha, here's Srila Sridhar Maharaj shining through. So it's a strange thing to find out, but there it is. So anyways, we're reading from Planets of Faith. Planets of Faith. Srila Sridhar Maharaj said, faith is the only means through which we can see, hear, or feel the higher world. Otherwise, it is all meaningless to us. Wow. So here Srila Sridhar is just pointing out that um, the phenomenal world can be known only to a very limited extent by our senses. We don't really use our senses so much to understand the phenomenal world. In fact, we use our intelligence a lot. You look at something and it appears to be real, but then you think, well, wait a minute, I know what this is. I was taught like this, according to my intellectual understanding. It's not that, it's something different. We do that all the time. So we do read the world with our senses, but we also read it with our intelligence. You like, for example, I have this thing on my hand that hurt my thumb. So the other day I'm playing with a little dog, and he hadn't seen that. And I reached out for the dog, and he saw that on my hand. Oh, what is that? Oh no. See, that's a natural reaction. Right. If you take an animal into the street for the first time in their life and they see a car, their reaction is there's a terrible demonic monster machine out there that's going to kill me. That would be a natural reaction. But when you see a car, you don't feel like that. You go, okay, well, that's a Honda, or it's a Toyota, or it's a Chevy, right? You're not thinking, there's a monstrous contraption of steel that's going to kill me, right? Why not? You have intelligence. Your intelligence reads the situation a little bit differently than the senses. So what Srila Sridhar Maharaj is saying here is that there is a higher reality, but you can't read that with your senses. You can't even read it with your intelligence. You can only read it with faith. And so this is a novel idea. Uh, it's non-intuitive in our modern age. But it was intuitive thousands of years ago when people had more faith. He says faith is the only means through which we can see, hear, or feel the higher world. Which you can see the higher world, but not with your vegetable eye. You can see it with faith. To understand that plane, an inner awakenment is necessary. We can connect with the upper world only through a higher source. Therefore, Divyam Jnanam, knowledge of the higher plane, it's not ordinary knowledge. It is transcendental, supramental feeling and sense. But to realize this, surrender is compulsory. So he's laying down basic credo of the Vaishnavas. He's saying you cannot read the inner world or the higher world without faith. And that faith will become more powerful through surrender. Without surrender, it's not possible. So then you come to the question, what is surrender? What do we mean by that? And then, there's this very dry book called Prapanachivanamrita, which is not dry at all, but to the external appreciation, it seems like this is impenetrable. But if you go through it quietly and carefully, you'll notice faith will blossom in your heart. But to realize this, surrender is compulsory. After that, we may go on hearing and chanting, remembering and worshiping and praising the Lord, or rendering so many other kinds of service. But the first thing, the foundation of devotion, must be self-surrender. So this is, that's Srila Sridhar Maharaj's particular contribution. This is what he says. Otherwise, nothing will be affected. Our show of devotion will all be imitation. So getting back to my theme of imitation at the beginning. So you may wear certain clothes, you know. I've seen, I don't know, Goswami Maharaj, he told me, uh, don't look at the internet because they're all trolls. But I can't help it. My friends are on the internet, but you'll see people wearing fire engine red uh, sannyasi outfits, or pink or saffron, and okay, that's not really the style, but then they will put themselves in the position of telling you, uh, you should walk like this, you should talk like that. But here's Srila Sridhar Maharaj is saying, you may walk the walk and you may talk the talk, but if there's no self-surrender, that's not it. It will be an imitation. So we have to beware of imitation. We must sincerely feel, I shall be faithful in my service to the Supreme Lord. I'm meant for him. I am ready to die to live. I want to live for him only and not for fulfilling any separate interest. I want nothing less than the absolute. I want to be his completely. But of course, this is very, very difficult. We may not get there in one lifetime. But this sort of intensity is an indispensable necessity for a devotee. So it's not that what Srila Sridhar Maharaj is saying is high or difficult or hard to puzzle out. What he's saying is very clear. The problem is we don't want to do it. So it's easy to wake someone up who's sleeping, but it's impossible to wake up a man who's pretending to sleep. So, here we are pretending to sleep and listening very carefully This sort of intensity is an indispensable necessity for a devotee. Devotee has to conceive, to feel that he's meant for Krishna. He's not an independent entity. He's dependent on Krishna, the highest absolute center and nothing else. To identify with the interests of our family, society, or country is extended selfishness. But all false identification must be eliminated. We must be neither selfish nor entangled in extended selfishness. What he means by that is that uh, I am the center of the universe. I'm the Lord of all I survey. And this is my partner. She's in it with me. Together we will conquer the world. And these little babies here, those are my extensions. They're my avatars. And together we will conquer the world. And I kind of have a tribe of folks that are family or extended family, but that's all me too. And we get together and support the same football team. So that's really me, me. George Harrison wrote a nice song called I Me Mine. All through the day, I me mine, I me mine, I me mine. So Srila Sridhar was saying, your identification with your football club, the church, the school, the community, the mayor, you know, the county, your country, your nation, one nation under God, and all that. That's really selfishness, extended selfishness. It's all me, me, me. It's hard to hear, you know, but he says all false identification must be eliminated. And this, I don't know, I think about this recently. I was thinking, I don't know if I saw some movie or something, or I don't know, read something that there's this teenage girl, and she doesn't identify as a girl. She identifies as the boy. And she really feels like she's a boy because she likes to play football and she likes girls. So what she decides is if she doesn't have an operation and, completely change her gender, then she can't be happy. And I think it was a movie, had good actors. So the movie goes on. The poor girl is just suffering and suffering because she wants this, uh, I don't know, sex change operation, right? And I was thinking, well, okay, so what if that works out, you know, and you can physically change your sex? Like in the Mahabharata, we have the story of Shikundi, who she's determined to become a man so she can kill Bhishma, you know. So what if that works out, right? Well, I think there's a lot of men who are unhappy, you know? Do you think that just by becoming a man, you will be happy? How does that work? Or maybe the reverse, you see men. There's this guy, Bruce Jenner. He was an Olympic world champion. I remember he won something like 8 gold medals, right? He wanted to become a woman. So by becoming a woman, now, are you going to be happy? Look around. There's plenty of unhappy women. So just by owning a particular identity as male or female, is that going to be the source of happiness? Or shall we rather think that, happiness, distress, these things come and go. Uh, it's not predicated on a, being able to maintain a particular identity. Uh, There was a famous case of a, a white woman, and she had kind of curly hair. And so she identified as black and participated in, oh, black music and black culture and became a poet. And someone exposed her and said, well, wait a minute, your parents are blonde and blue-eyed and they come from Norway. We know you're not really black. And she was very upset. There were lawsuits. And then there's black people who want to be white. And they're thinking, how my life, people discriminate against me and I don't belong because my skin is dark. I want to be white. But there's plenty of unhappy white people. Just by being white is not going to make you happy. Just by being black, it's not going to make you happy. We're all looking for happiness, but we're ignoring our real self-interest, which is spiritual happiness. And Srila Sri Ramakrishna is pointing out, you can achieve that level of spiritual happiness that you're looking for through faith. You won't find it by investing your faith in your body and in your extended body. You won't find that. He says selfishness, which is an interesting word, but we're identifying ourself with the body. So we think my self-interest is to promote I'm a white man, so my self-interest is to promote the white people. Or I'm a woman, so my self-interest is to promote the women. But your sense of self is perverted here. What is our real nature, you know? To identify with the interests of our family, society, or country is extended selfishness, but all false identification must be eliminated. So if you say, well, identify as a follower of Manchester United or Liverpool or Mexico or Ireland, you know, these are all misplaced loyalties. Rather, all sorts of foreign contamination must be eliminated from our conception of self. All outside demands must be cancelled. Then we shall feel in our innermost hearts that we are connected with the whole of the infinite, the absolute. So our real self-interest is our spiritual self-interest. And nothing external is required for our success. The only thing required of us is that we dismantle the ego's cover. Wow. The ego is collecting some foreign elements, but that foreign collection box must be dissolved, finished. And then in our innermost hearts, we shall find our connection with the fundamental plane of loving service to the organic whole. Of course, this is a tricky question, right? The Buddha had this analysis. It's a very powerful analysis. He says you're suffering. Uh, he sees suffering everywhere, birth, death, old age, disease, so many problems, the threefold miseries, uh, neighbors, dogs. He says, why? Why are we suffering? Well, you're suffering because you're not happy with what you have. You should be happy with what you have, but you can't. Why? Desire. See, you want something more. I remember, uh, well, like Oliver Twist, he holds out his bowl and says, I want more, more, more. It's never enough. Uh, I have a friend of mine, she's a teacher, she's Japanese. She had a little boy. He was my student, Toshi, cute little kid. Christmas time comes, and his mother gave him everything. Nintendos, t-shirts, purple socks, you know, the dinosaur hat he wanted. And but he came to her in tears. And he said, where's the rest of it? I want more. And she said, but you have plenty. And Toshi said, plenty is not enough. So we're never satisfied. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You always need more money. Even the super billionaires, they need to buy another yacht, another Van Gogh painting. They're never satisfied, right? We need more. So Buddha says the origin of your pain is I want. So where does that come from? What's the origin of that? Ego. See, I hurt comes from I want. And I want comes from I am. Wow. So Buddha says, the solution is to dissolve the ego. And, this is a good formula, even in Shankaracharya, even in, Vaishnava understanding. So you have to get rid of the ego. But here's the problem. Getting rid of the ego is spiritual suicide. You can't dissolve the ego in the Buddhist manner and preserve any sense of self. What Vaishnava, literature, Sridhar Maharaj teaches us is that uh, you dissolve the ego of it's all for me and my family by surrender and by service and by creating a special relationship with the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Guru and his grace. And through seva, we discover a different kind of ego as a servant of God. That's what I understand. So when he says dissolve the ego, he means give up selfishness, and selfishness in the sense that this is everything. It's a very unique point of view. He says nothing external is required for our success. The only thing required for us is that we dismantle the ego's cover. Then we will find our connection with the fundamental plane of loving service to the organic whole. So that's what we're about. We're about loving service to the organic whole. And another point that, bears mentioning is that if our religion, our dharma, is about love of God, you can't, all right, yeah, we hate Maya, we hate the material world, we're in a war with Maya, but you cannot hate other people and love God. It's a strange conundrum, a strange paradox. Hate the sin and not the sinner. We can see other people are doing terrible things, uh, sinful things, but at the same time, one needs to see these folks are suffering and have compassion and think, well, if only they could come to a proper path of spiritual enlightenment, perhaps they would suffer less and be less sinful. But who am I to judge? It's not my business. You know, if I look at Christ says, before you criticize the, you know, beam in someone else's eye, uh, remove the mote from your own eye, you know. Let who is without sin cast the first stone. I was explaining the story of Henry VIII to my English students yesterday, and they wanted to know. Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery and incest, and they asked me, "Well, what is incest?" God, I have to explain that. What is adultery? I have to explain that. Okay. And so, what is the punishment? And I said, used to be adultery was a very punishable offense, but now in the West, it's not so much. But I know that in some Islamic countries, they still punish adultery by stoning. So they dig a hole and they put the woman in a canvas bag and fill the hole up until she's buried up to her neck or thereabouts. And the men stand around and throw stones. But Christ saw that and he said, well, wait a minute. Who among you is free of sin? So let he who is without sin cast the first stone. It means it's not my position to be in the supermarket and judge the other people there and see, aha, look what they're buying. He's buying whiskey. Hey, mister, you're going to hell, whiskey drinker. And aha, look at those people over there. They're buying meat, you know. Hey, meat eating demon, you're going to hell. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy. This is not a very mature, point of view as a truth seeker. Otherwise, you must live in the desert on honey, you know, and I don't know, locust bean and honey, like St. John the Baptist. Funny thing is, honey today, it's produced by bees, and the poor bees are being exploited, so you can't really eat honey either. It's a really karmic thing to do. So let he who is without sin cast the first stone. The point is, it's not our business to have the ego of the preacher and judge everyone else. We try to dissolve the ego through service and love of God, but don't hate your fellow man. The ego is collecting some foreign elements, but that foreign collection box must be dissolved, finished. And then in our innermost hearts, we shall find our connection with the fundamental plane of loving service to the organic whole. So this is a real challenge. It's easy to walk the walk with the cane and the slight limp and say, uh, divine consciousness is coming from higher plane, but dissolve the ego, that's a challenge. How do you do that? You know? And how do you do that without creating violence to other people? It's an interesting problem. He says this, both enjoyment and renunciation are abnormal. There are two kinds of demons, enjoyment or exploitation, and eternal rest or renunciation. So you would think, like we were talking a couple of weeks back, we would have a competition to see who could be more renounced. So, you know, don't eat meat, fish, eggs, beer, whiskey, coffee, tea, milk. Now there's the vegans. They say, don't you drink milk. That's very bad. You're hurting the cow. Look at all the terrible tortures they make to the cow. And then you say, well, okay, I'll live by honey. Oh no, they're torturing the honeybee. So how renounced can you be? But you don't dissolve the ego with renunciation. It doesn't work like that. Why? Say you renounce the world, then the first thought that comes to you is, I renounce the world. I'm I'm the best of the renunciants. And this is another ego trap because it's the ego of renunciation. And so, Srila Sridhar, I was astonished when I heard that because I was practicing brahmacharya for like 11 years when I sat at Srila Sridhar Maharaj's holy feet and heard him say, you know, renunciation is just as bad as exploitation. What? What do you mean? I thought that was our thing. I thought we're supposed to. At that time I owned two kurtas, two dhotis, a few strips of extra cloth for other things. a couple of books, and I traveled around the world like that. I had nothing. And I thought, but still, I should give up, what I have. Uh, Bhaktivinoda Thakur told the story that one time uh, he was fasting on milk, but he had a few potatoes just in case. And Gorky Shordas Babaji Maharaj came to him at like 2 o'clock in the morning and asked him for a potato. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur thought to himself, why is Babaji Maharaj asking me for a potato? Don't understand. What is the transcendental significance of this? And a few days later, he came to the conclusion that, oh, Babaji Maharaj was asking me for a potato because I was attached to that potato. So we're told to avoid attachment. Why isn't renunciation good? Because it's the flip side of exploitation. Once you go deep into renunciation, you'll hit a point. It's like Christmas presents, you know. You buy Christmas presents for your mom, and then, oh, well, your dad, and then your partner, your son, and your daughter. And then one day you're walking by the big department store and you go, what about me? You know, I already gave to everybody else. Now it's my turn. So renunciation is like that. It's boga tyag. You give everything up, but sooner or later, the karmic boomerang will come back to you and you'll go, now it's my turn. I need more. I want something for me. So Srila Sri Ramakrishna says these two tendencies are our enemies. A higher positive life is possible only when we become fully independent of both exploitation and renunciation. So that's something to, you know, something to think about. It's kind of in a way, this idea is kind of in a way something like the golden mean of Aristotle, because Aristotle says, well, don't go to the extremes, you know, uh, stay in the middle. Aristotle, of course, he founds the Stoic school. And what he says is interesting. He says, try to live the good life. He says you can't live the good life if you don't structure your life with some character, with some moral backbone, with some ethical consideration. And that means you should have four basic virtues in your life. He defines virtue as excellence in a thing, like a knife is virtuous if it cuts. And so he says you should have courage because if you're a coward, you can't be happy. He says you should have wisdom because if you don't have wisdom, you don't understand how to use your courage. And it should also be balanced with justice. And your life will fall apart if you don't have temperance. And temperance means moderation in eating and drinking, sex, and things like that. So there you get the four regulative principles: no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, you know, what other illicit sex, keep it on an even keel, right? And it's interesting if you think about it, that what Aristotle is saying is real happiness would be based on a balanced life, a good life. Whereas the American point of view is more like flat out pleasure 24 hours a day. That's happiness. But it isn't. It's just like if you have a mosquito bite, it's pleasurable to scratch that. But if you continually scratch, you'll get an infection. So pleasure is like that. It's just the flip side of pain. But happiness, according to Aristotle, he says, live a balanced life, live a good life. And Marcus Aurelius, he takes it further. He says, uh, he really spells it out, the philosopher king. But say 1,000 years later, uh, Thomas Aquinas looks at that. He goes, well, this is lacking because you may have courage, you may live a good life. You may have some wisdom and justice in your life, and you may have temperance. And so you may live a balanced life. But what is that without faith? Because if you don't have faith, you have nothing. And what is faith without hope? You need a higher prospect. You can't just have faith all the time. There must be something, you know, a higher promise. And all of this is useless without love. So then he goes to 7 different virtues. So Srila Sridhar is telling us renunciation is not the goal. Exploitation is not the goal. And of course, when he says exploitation, he's talking about karma. When he says uh, renunciation, really he's talking about gyan. So if you go back to the beginning of the chapter, where he's talking about planets of faith, what he's saying is there's different levels of faith, different sorts of planets, if you like. And you can have faith in nothing. That's Buddha. You can have faith in man. That's humanism. You have faith in the elements and the gods. That's a sort of primitive karmic faith. You can have faith in Shiva, kind of, but that's not really faith. It's sort of atheistic. Uh, we hold faith in a personal divine absolute, Sri Krishna. And that faith will be enhanced through surrender and bhakti. So that's kind of the beginning of the loving search for the lost servant. And I'm sorry if I ramble and dither about, but I'm getting old. Please forgive me if I have said anything incorrect or unfortunate in my reading. And I hope that uh, Srila Maharaj's truth shines forth somehow or other in these uh, humble Sunday gatherings and talks that we're doing. And happy Sunday to Tapanandini there in South Mexico, over in Merida near the pyramids. And it's good, on the other side of the world, as far north as he could possibly be, is Adwai Krishna Prabhu up in Cooley. And you can see the cows out his window there. Is it raining?
Not ish, not really at the moment. Not at the moment.
Not at the moment, but we hope, for more rain, more green. Ireland is such a green country. All right. And thank you very much, Sivastani Meenakshi Sundaram, for pushing me and telling me, come on, let's do it again. Let's put on another Sunday talk. And thank you for Hari Priya for hanging in there. I can't believe that you have the patience to listen to me ramble like this.
Can I
Thank
ask a can I ask a question?
Sure.
Well, especially at the beginning when you're told that we are told you're not this body, the family, the nation, the country, the county, the football team. It sounds so wow, yes, that it is. Then years go by and because it's very difficult to surrender, then we found ourselves in no man's land, which is terrible at times. How to cope with that? I don't know if it makes any sense.
Yeah,
Be-
it does make sense. You
because
always make sense, Odd. Why?
there is
You know?
a tendency. I mean, I see it in myself. I don't want to speak for others, but then you find like you don't really have roots anymore in a way, but you're heading towards a place that you don't have a clue about it, about its real reality, and you feel lost in a way, and it's sometimes it hurts. It seems like I don't know if it makes sense
Yeah,
because the land of faith is something that it's so. I mean, on a personal level, I know nothing about it, so it's really. And sometimes there's this tendency to all looking back, like I'm Italian, I'm this, I'm that, because you need to feel some belonging. And I don't know if it makes any sense. It's just probably my speculation about how I feel.
I'm I'm nonplussed, but yeah, you're asking 100 questions at once, you know. So it's I don't. How can I respond, really? You know. Uh, First of all, what we're trying to cope with, I guess, is all right. So I know I'm not this body intellectually, right? But if you put a needle in my finger, I will jump. It hurts, I react. So there's what I consider, intellectually to be reality, and then there's how I deal with that in the real world in a real way, you know. I have a good word in Spanish. It's called profundizando, It means to dive deep. So if you have a deep consideration that I am a spiritual entity, you know, uh, that colors your attitude towards things. It doesn't mean that you don't belong to a football club. See, you have your political point of view, you have your opinions, you have the things that you like, the music that you listen to, and so on. Uh, I think some devotees, they try to immerse themselves 100%, uh, 24 hours a day in Krishna stuff. And that way they feel more comfortable about being Krishna conscious, if you will. Um, but then immediately they're confronted with a real situation that involves risk or pain, a hospital, a car crash, working at a job, and they lose it. So that's sort of, I don't know, in a way, that's kind of what we would call soft faith or Kanishta Adhikari. So you see the God in the temple. And you know that when you're in the temple hearing the spiritual noise of the Bhagavad Gita, everything is cool and you are Krishna conscious. But when you walk out and your mother's in the car, uh, ready to drive you to the hospital to have your ear removed, suddenly everything changes. It's not the same. Um, so there's your intellectual understanding of dogma or the faith. Uh, but the trick or the challenge, I think, is to deepen your understanding till it's part of you, till you're absorbed in a Krishna conscious groove, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's
So
uh,
that's in a way what faith is about. Is
mm,
She says, look, faith is a way of seeing the world. Faith is a way of of seeing your reality. Okay? It may be that your reality is a difficult one, it's a dangerous one. Maybe you're a soldier, and you can't tell your friends that you're a Hare Krishna because they'll beat you to death. And you don't want to be Haridas Thakur, so you have to keep it to yourself. So, but still, you have your internal understanding of reality. Bali Maharaj, he was a demon, and he was cast down into hell, but he was a devotee. Somehow he loved Krishna in the form of, Vamanadev, but he was cast down into hell as a punishment for being a demon. And he was like, well, that's all right. I can, I don't know if he chanted Hare Krishna, but the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have the kirtan. So internally, we're doing the kirtan. Even if we're in an isolated position, we're still communicating with um, our higher authorities. I feel like Srila Sridhar Maharaj is always with me. He doesn't particularly like me. You know, I don't think he has a high opinion of everything I do, but he appreciates that, I did that thing with the book. And, maybe there's some hope for me somewhere. Once I was at the ashram in Navadvip, and I left my uh, I left my japa, you know. I left my japa bag, hanging on a hook because we took prasadam late at night, and they had a hook for hanging your japa so it didn't touch the floor, you know. And I forgot it. I left it there. So early in the morning before Mangala Arati, I went over there looking for my japa, and there's Krishna Sharan with a big grin, you know. Later became a Ranya Maharaj. He's holding up my japa. He looked at me and he said, this japa, no hope. And I said, no hope? He said, no hope. So, you know, I don't think that Guru Maharaj necessarily had a very high opinion of me or anything I did, but still, uh, all these things that he said, die to live, dive deeper, uh, exploitation and renunciation, all these different things. Again, planets of faith, you know, as I'm going through my day, I'm seeing that. And I think that's what he means by being able to see things with faith. You know, you're in a particular position and you're being abused. And you think, okay, well, wasn't Prahlad Maharaj abused? Or you have a way of linking your experience back to your inner contemplation of the teachings, something like that. Okay, so the idea is you begin to experience yourself as Atma. Not just intellectually, but intuitively, I'm eternal. This body, this family, these children, the whole thing, it's it's real. It's not just a picture show. It's not a holograph. These are real people I'm dealing with. I have to have compassion for them and love even, but uh, I know it's all just a passing fancy, it's all going to dissolve. When Sanatana Goswami was in prison because the Muslims discovered him to be a Hindu. Sanatana Goswami he got a note from Rupa Goswami saying, you know, keep your mind calm. Remember, the soul is eternal. And that concept that the soul is eternal will carry you a long way. And after that, the Gayatri Mantra, because that's a reflection of the, who we are and where we are. You know, Gayatri Mantra is so powerful. That's why it's given along with the Hare Krishna mantra, because Hare Krishna mantra is okay. It's happy Vrindavan land, beautiful, But the Gayatri mantra is telling you, where am I? Where the devil am I? I'm in Om. I'm surrounded by Om. And inside this Om, inside this eternal spiritual reality, there's the world of experience. This plane, Boo Loka, Boo. It's the world of experience. That's what I'm contemplating. It's within me and without me. And what's above that? The mental world, the world of sports, the world of business, the world of finance. And above that, you know, pi r squared, the intellectual world, the mathematical world, the world of physics, quantum physics. And what's beyond that? Light. And where does the light come from? The sun. But that's just kind of, illustrative. The sun tells us there is light. But what's the real light of the universe? The soul, you know? And who illumines the soul? God. And what's that? You know? Well, we're informed about that, you know? Is if I have a personality and you have a personality, if I have masculinity and you have femininity, isn't there a chance that divinity would be all that and more? And then we come to Radha and Krishna and Hare Krishna. So our meditation involves remembering these things, and that can be remembered at any moment. And that can carry you through. In terms of isolation, I take a bit of solace, even though they're Christians and they're Catholics and their whole thing is so distinct. But I find it interesting what the ancient desert fathers, uh, from the time of the original Saint Anthony of Egypt, were contemplating in their cells, because they were thinking, well, okay, if this is true, how can I experience it? How can I see it for reality? And Saint Anthony saw that Christ said, sell everything that you have or give it away and come and follow me. That's a very hard thing to do. And those of you who've lived in an ashram know that, you know. But you're up there in Cooley, you're as isolated as you could possibly be, you know. Well, you can see in the morning, sometimes I go out, or sometimes I'm painting. This happens, right? I'm painting a sky. I like to paint, you know. Panashish will know. I'm painting a sky. Yeah, it's nice. Can I put orange in that? Why not? I work on it for an hour. And then I come out and I see the sun's going down. I look up at the sky and there's some clouds. And I think, oh my God, who painted that? Oh my God, God, who painted? Ah, there's something up there, something out there. So to be
Boy,
to be in contact with the divine, you know, up there in Cooley, it's perfect. You've got the ocean, you've got the sky, everything is green. You see life everywhere. So when Srila Sridhar says that, every wave is favorable, you've got the ocean to think about, you know, when you think that, you know, reality itself is resting on some spiritual principle. I have to.
I think he's left. So, oh, okay. I don't know what happened. It just left. Maybe and then what pronounce everyone to see you next week. I don't think he is coming back.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.